Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's session. We'll invite my panel to reveal themselves. So Gul is the fastest one, and she's already joined us. So today, as you know, we are talking about the build-to-rent market. So let me find our, Martin is coming. I need Anya.
Sarah, I can't seem to turn the video on.
Okay, let me do.
Here we go.
Here you go. Perfect. So
perfect.
You go. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Mine is still saying that it's blocked.
You're here. You're
here.
Yeah.
There we go.
So good morning, everybody. We have got a very good audience this morning to talk about this very interesting topic. So the build to rent, and how do we build a community in the build to rent buildings? Our experts today, and is a very serious panel of experts. So we have Sogol Zarinjang. She is the managing director at Way of Life. Sogol oversees the quality of the way of life journey. She ensures that each customer experiences a seamless process from the point of inquiry throughout their stay and until they move out to the next stage of their lives. Way of Life offers best-in-class rental accommodation across the UK. They market, manage, and let over 850 homes in central locations in the UK. And the company makes the joys of central living a reality. Sogol has also been, in 2019, was selected as one of the 49 women who will shape the future of the UK real estate by Bisno. Also with us this morning is Anya Sokolskaya. She's the creative director and co-founder at 10 London. Anya is an award-winning interior designer with over 10 years experience of working in top London architecture and design studios like Cornan and Partners. And she is graduated at Chelsea College of Art in London. Anya's specialism on build to rent, which started in 2014, was born out of equal passion for both residential and hospitality interiors. With us, and for once is the only gentleman in the panel, which is a nice change, is Martin Durish from Manchester. Martin is the studio manager for the Naomi Cleaver studio in Manchester since 2018. Martin brings to the team over 15 years experience in working with practices both in London and Manchester across multiple sectors, from new build restoration and with varying project values from £75,000 to 100 million. Martin has just finished working on the beautiful Angel's Garden build to rent scheme in Manchester by Moda Living. Last but not least is Silvana Young, another very impressive profile here. She is a surveyor and spent the last 25 years working in design, construction, management, and operations of residential properties. She spent the last decade at the forefront of the BTR sector, most notably when the Linksy and QD won the bid to procure the Artless Village in 2011. Silvana was part of a team of 4 from Young Group that pitched the idea to create their own lettings and management company and to run the village as a rental neighborhood. 3 years as a consultant and 6 years as a part of the executive team Get Living, with East Village and its other sites, is now a 2 billion listed REIT. So as you can see, is a serious brains here with us today. So as usual, I've got my set of questions that I would like to start with, and then please feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A section that is available here on Zoom. We'll keep an eye on that, and as usual, try to respond to every question you might have. So good. I will start from you, since you've got such a massive portfolio. Obviously, we can't talk about build to rent without thinking of the coronavirus emergency we are living. What do you think were the trends before the pandemic started about the build to rent sector, and how do you think that the pandemic has affected these trends?
Thank you, Sarah. I always like to say it's so nice to see everyone, but I cannot see our audience. So good morning to all of you. I think this is a very good question. I think back in January, when there was conversation around this coronavirus, people felt that, oh, it's not going to reach us. Some of our colleagues were relaxed, and some of us were thinking about how this tiny virus can, impact all of us. So since March, we've been in this lockdown, and some of us were in the middle of construction, some of us were in the middle of a let-up period, some of us were holding to the stabilized asset, and some of us had these beautiful amenity spaces. I guess what I can confirm here is, like, even before COVID, we were all thinking about providing an excellent customer service, designing a quality home, and also creating a lively and a safe neighborhood for our customers. And it was before COVID, and after COVID, we all sat back and say, we've got these amazing, amenity spaces, but we have to shut them down. We used to have a lovely customer team on site, but they cannot go on site anymore. So it made us think about what this will impact us in future and how long this is going to last. So we had to adopt some of our protocol and just listen to the government advice on a day in, day out. And, we have, buildings in different locations. So every morning we had to wake up and see what's happening in Manchester, what's happening in Birmingham and Leicester. So we couldn't have one size fit all. I guess this is also gave us an opportunity to think about future design. Not necessarily taking the customer service element away, but the way that we're designing our building in case we cannot man the site. And what are the other routes that we can provide the service without being on site too? So relying on technology, making sure that we create some space, because originally pre-COVID, everyone were thinking about just get rid of any unnecessary barrier between us and the customers. And with the COVID, we had to think about, okay, we need to keep this social distancing. We cannot have that interaction and a lively conversation, which we used to have. So few changes, but the fundamental will, stay the same pre or after COVID. And that is about providing an excellent customer service and designing a quality home.
Thank you. Anya, from an interior designer perspective, obviously Sogol has already introduced the idea, the build to rent was mainly focused on the amenity spaces. How is the coronavirus affecting this? And how can we still build a community when we are limited in the use of the amenity and communal areas?
I want to just echo some what Sogol is saying, because even before COVID, I think a lot of the amenity design, the brief from a lot of the operators that we work with is to make it as self-sufficient for the residents to use as possible. Because at the end of the day, it is not quite like a hotel where you're calling on someone to bring you things all the time. You want to make sure that the operations team is busy overseeing the whole development, and that the residents are free to help themselves and use the amenity space as much as possible without supervision and without help from the team that's based there. So I think definitely also with the sort of corona glasses, post-corona glasses on for the next builds, because of course we always design and build for the future. So the projects that are on site now were, drawn up 3, 4, 5 years ago. So if we think 3, 4, 5 years ahead, I think definitely designing more self-sufficient spaces, perhaps spaces that can be used, that are flexible, that can be used by smaller groups of people as well as bigger ones. So we see a lot of segmentation in open plan spaces, but I'm not talking about segmentation that's physical in terms of starting to break up a large, beautiful, well-lit space into smaller rooms, because I think psychologically and design-wise, nobody really wants that, because at the end of the day, we create the amenity spaces for the residential community to have the opportunity to come together rather than be isolated. But spaces where perhaps people that are a little bit more cautious can feel like they're a little bit more sheltered and a bit more protected, or they have the agency to, let's say, for example, I've taken a plane just recently, and it really gave me the psychological satisfaction of being able to wipe down the surfaces around me. Like all those little things that I think are going to just give you a slightly more relaxed feel. Like, okay, I'm in control of my small little environment here. I'm going to spend a few hours here, and I don't feel like I am completely exposed to everybody else walking past. So it's these kind of little spaces that we always try to build into the open plan scenario. Yeah. I think they're going to be key to people enjoying the spaces in the future. Hopefully, I feel really sad that all of the amenities had to close down. I'm hoping that that was obviously very much a quick reaction from the government, obviously putting on the brakes. But in the future, I would actually be quite optimistic in saying that whilst maybe the resident community, let's say you have 200 apartments, cannot go out and socialize in pubs, in bars, etc., getting together in a smaller group with people that live next to you nearby seems like a lot more of a sensible and sort of healthier approach. So hopefully we won't see mass closures of residential amenity spaces in the future. Fingers crossed.
Well, at some point we will be able to learn to live with this virus and find new ways to come together in a safe, as you say, with some peace of mind, and but still safely come together. Social interaction is still very important. So Martin, you obviously just finalized a building in Manchester. How do you future-proof an existing asset like that?
I think it's a bit of a tricky one at the moment. Obviously, yeah, as you mentioned, Angel Gardens just opened fully in the last few months through COVID. But what the operational team have put in place is, you know, a series of stations for residents to be able to clean their hands. There's notices around for social distancing, masks must be worn in corridor spaces, etc. So they're doing as much as they possibly can, and obviously covering government guidelines to be effective with that. I think from a design perspective, you know, a lot of the spaces we designed there are, as Annie mentioned before, quite flexible in the way that the plan's set out. So we have large open plan spaces, but they can be closed down through sliding doors to kind of create more intimate spaces. We've got social areas where people are obviously able to gather, but at distance. And there's things like high back chairs where you can have, you know, your own little kind of private space to be able to work from, or sit and have a drink with a partner. So there's flexibility in the plan. I think continually moving forward, I think flexibility in the design to cope with this current situation, but also to give people the opportunity to, you know, you don't always want to be in big social spaces. You do want time to kind of close down, but still feel like you're part of something that's going on, part of a community. So I think that's really important in terms of how we design these amenity spaces and the level of flexibility that they offer to residents.
As Silvana, as Martin just touched the topic that we are all working from home just now. And this is, for some people that are lucky have got space, is really not a problem, but for some people that live in small apartments could be a major issue. How do you see the build to rent reacting to this new way of working?
I think, yes, it is an interesting one. I think we need to be, we used to have the fact that when we were designing the amenity spaces, it was providing a reason for somebody to have something that wasn't inside their house. You had to have a reason to draw them out of already being in their home. Whereas now the demand for space outside of the home has got, it's almost like you've spent so much time having to do your Zoom calls in your room, in your bedroom, in a shared space potentially, that actually your reasoning for wanting to go out into the communal spaces is completely turned on its head. That you'll be looking, having spent your day at home on your own, you need that community sense that you've been missing from not being in the office. I think the difference can be providing the things that people you're hearing being talked about that people are missing the most is, you know, a quiet space for the Zoom call. You're talking about somewhere with maybe better ergonomic workstations, workplaces than you get inside your home, less distraction. So again, these can all be different calls to action to what those new spaces really need to be looking like, but it still forms part of what is truly flexible. And truly flexible, as Anya was saying, it's you know, it doesn't necessarily mean make a smaller space, because that space can be broken in so many ways, but it's going all the way back to the construction of it in the first place. You've got to think about, you know, a flexible space isn't just a big empty room, but it's got to have the right lighting, it's got to have the right cooling, it's got to have the right kind of flooring strength, it's got to have the right number of power points. And then once you've thought about all the different parts that make that space right, it can then just look like a big empty box, but it needs to be able to then have the infrastructure to be able to be adapted. So.
Anya, how do you think furniture can help in this, with this problem, both inside the flats and in the amenity spaces?
I think it's actually more than furniture. There's, like Silvana says, you as a designer, you kind of get a set of plans, and what we do, and I'm sure everybody else in our industry, is that you start to think about scenarios for those particular spaces. So how people are going to be using them, how the front of house will work, how the back of house will work. So there's almost like a sing-along of all those journeys that you try and plan. And then of course, we always try to build in a couple of eventualities, like, okay, what if, for example, let's say a reception space for me is always a very interesting one, because in a lot of buildings, it's quite a large space, and essentially it's always very much the focal point of the concierge desk. And you'll see a lot of hotels have started moving away from that, maybe 10 years ago, because essentially when you end up with the reception space that's overwhelmed by the concierge, people don't want to spend time there, because it just ends up being kind of a policed, very formal environment. So a lot of the time what we do is kind of try and balance lots of different scenarios. So, okay, a lot of the developers still do want that physical presence of a reception counter. And I think residents like that as well, because essentially if they have a problem, they know exactly where to go to. But trying to give these spaces multiple uses, so that in an eventuality where, let's say, in 6 months' time, hopefully we're COVID free, the reception can start to become a lively hub, a space for hosting events, etc. And then the space can adapt and be changed depending on how the operations team want to use it. Furniture obviously comes as an integral part of that. And I think it's a balance between the sort of the fit out, which is, let's say, a bit more of a fixed furniture, so that creating the architecture, and then the loose FF&E furniture being quite flexible, so it can be moved around and rearranged even by residents. Because a lot of the buildings, what I particularly love to do is that when we finish a site, come back 6 months later. Ideally, once I came across one of our sites in Manchester, Clippers Quay, and I stumbled upon the residents' party. They were having a hoot. This was like the end of the night, because I was visiting another site and I just popped along, and how they were all using it and chatting and, mess drinks all over the tables. It's exactly the kind of scenarios that we were hoping were going to come to life, and then just seeing people utilizing, using, sitting, dancing on the tables, all that sort of stuff. It's amazing to see people utilize the space as and how they want.
Martin, if we look at the infrastructure of a building, what changes do you need to keep in mind for the future? Better internet, better air conditioning?
Yeah, technology is the big one, really. It's obviously changing constantly, so trying to keep up with that is quite tricky. But yeah, fundamentally, I think technology plays a really big key in design. Obviously, in terms of level of infrastructure now, but also kind of moving forward. I think the way technology is expanding, we're talking about at the moment social distancing, but I do think the way technology is moving, we'll be able to have more kind of physical interaction through technology. So holographic projection is a big one that I've seen recently, which sounds really interesting, and being able to have a 3D presence within a room without not physically being there. So I do think, as technology develops even further, we'll get more interactive with the way that can work. So yeah, I think on the whole, good infrastructure in terms of technology and being able to adapt as technology moves quickly. So yeah, the backbones of the infrastructure of that building have to be bang on, really, in terms of
up to date.
Yeah, in terms of being able to develop with the times, because it's just moving so quickly at the moment.
If I may add to Martin's comment, obviously the M&E I think is always a massive spend when you're doing a fit out. So of course the tech falls into that really nicely, and the ventilation, etc. I think everybody's really looking at, there's some amazing pieces of kit for lighting that can really enhance the space. But I think even some of the simple physical decision making in terms of having a slightly higher ceiling so that more light can come in, or for example where you have a glazed elevation, putting in doors that can fold out and open up and create that outdoor indoor situation that I think everybody has been craving over the lockdown, who didn't have an access to a greener space. We're seeing a lot more fit out, even in sort of traditionally rainy cities like Manchester. We're doing a project now where we've got massive amount of outdoor spaces, and we're putting in obviously massive things like parasols, umbrellas, heat lamps, etc., in order to make that work all year round. But it's great to see that finally, even in a country like UK, we're embracing that alfresco lifestyle.
Yeah, it's a bit challenging on the weather sometimes. They are fresco lifestyle in the UK.
It is, but that's why, you know, you can get canopies and umbrellas now that extend over 4 or 5 meters, and you know, it's quite nice to be huddled around that. And there's some amazing design examples everywhere with lighting and plants and everything. I think also, you know how it is up in the north, especially in places like Newcastle, people never wear a jacket, so you know, they're absolutely
come to Scotland on a sunny day, everybody's out in t-shirt and slippers.
Exactly, right?
I mean, I was thinking about the same thing, you know, because what we're doing is basically we're designing people's homes. So we are part of their experience, whatever we do. And I always think about from a design point, from a choice of furniture, even, you know, having an on-site team, recruitment, and even the contractors who's going in, they're all going to impact their journey with us. So it's not only one element. And I think that if we should forget about this is the building that we're designing, we should focus on this is a quality home for people. So it's about creating that lively and safe neighborhood and provide an excellent customer service through our design and technology as well. So I always think that what we're doing in a build to rent is quite fascinating, because we are touching lots of people's hearts, and they're coming to us because they trust us to look after them.
So good. Oh, sorry,
if I can just add, I just add that it actually it's really fascinating, because it's actually really exciting when you take it right back to the beginning of the design process, and when you're working with the design team, so all the engineers and the planners and the architects and the interior architects and all the different parts of that design team. And when it's a build to rent and you can take them on that journey, and you can work with them as the operator from right at the beginning, it makes the whole process so much more exciting than when they're designing a building and they don't know how it's going to be used. And they love it when you can take it on the journey. And we always used to, once the design team had been appointed, I would go around all the various different buildings that we were managing, and I'd point out things that had been designed that worked really well. And I point out the things that had been designed that really didn't work well. And we'd say, right, we want more of this and we want less of this. And these are the things that we find are really practical. These are things that give us 80% of our issues. So can we just change the way that's doing it? And also when you are going through the whole design and construction stages, there's quite a lot of just tick boxes that you have to get through for the regulations. But when the design team can see what the purpose is of what you're trying to, how you're going to be operating the building, they're not using it as just a checkbox anymore. They're actually thinking it through and coming up with using their own skills and their own ideas to say, well, actually, we can do it this way instead of that way, and we're still meeting it all, but it's better suited to how you're going to be using it. And it just makes it such a more exciting, dynamic process that it makes a big difference. So having that operator as part of the journey right from the beginning, it's fantastic. It's good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Silvana. I think that's one thing that we've been doing on a few schemes recently is having really early conversation with operators and getting an understanding of what they need, but then also thinking further ahead of things that they may not have thought of and how we can implement them. So one thing that we're doing at the minute in a large scheme in Birmingham is we have a big triple height entrance lobby atrium. It's how do we animate that atrium? So one thing we're doing there is actually adapting the staircase to create like a bleacher stair. So you can have different events going on in that space. So say you wanted a TED talk going on during the day to animate that space, or in the evening it turns into a cinema space for residents. You know, it gives it a level of adaptability. And then other rooms as well on the upper amenity levels. One thing we've looked at introducing is like almost like a village hall. These buildings are so big now, and how do we create these communities? You know, one thing that you get normally in a small village is a village hall where people come together, and you might have bake sales, or you may have beer making, or, you know, you do a yoga class in there or something. So it's giving people these spaces which they can have a level of ownership and to help create these levels of community within such vast spaces now. And then that hopefully allows longevity in terms of the tenant that's in there, and again creates a better sense of community within inside the buildings.
Yeah, I think we need to all have a vision of what we like this space to be, rather than just having a tick box exercise, because I sometimes challenge, you know, other colleagues to say, but why are we creating like, you know, this space like this? Is it just to say we have a box somewhere in the building, or is it because, as Anya mentioned, we would like them to drink together, dance together, and have fun together and build a true community, not only inside the building, but from outside to inside the building too. So people are happy to come and, you know, just look at your building and hopefully one day become your residence.
So while we are with you, we touched very briefly the topic of outdoor living. Now, as a way of life, you are specialized in central accommodation, so the joys of living centrally. While we are now talking that because of coronavirus and lockdown and everything, there is a lot of a trend of people trying to move outside in the countryside. So how do you interact with this? How do you fight off and keep people in cities?
So I think it's been, especially London, it's been quite challenging because if they have no need to go to the office, obviously people decided to go and live with their family, even, you know, rent a place outside of London, because they were all desperate for some outdoor space, which in a center of London, you don't have that space. So I guess what you can, what we've done, obviously, in other schemes in London, we don't have amenity space in other schemes in London, but the way that we try to somehow trade off and engage with other customers was through providing different activities and events for them, so they don't feel that they're lonely. Being, as Silvana mentioned, like being inside your apartment, taking this Zoom call day in and day out, you're just thinking, I need a balcony, I need to get out. So we work with a few people around the WellBeing. We've done lots of Instagrams, we did cooking online, we did running club through Strava. So we try to make it a bit more exciting for them and also engage with them. We also asked, who is the teacher in that, you know, building? Do they want to put their hands up and do some homeschooling? That everyone were desperate for it as well. So this is what we adopted for a London scheme. And obviously, as you know, Sarah, we have schemes in Leicester, Manchester, and Birmingham. So we had to follow the government advice in terms of closing down the amenity spaces. But then as soon as they told us thumbs up, we made sure that everything was in place through, you know, cleaning regime, giving them the trust that they wanted to use the gym and not, you know, worried about who actually been there. Yeah. We're also looking at like some kind of an app and a booking system for other buildings to see if we have lots of people interested to use the same space at the same time, we can just monitor how many people are in and use that space as well. So it was just like working with the on-site team and creating that interaction through different, you know, styles. And as soon as the government said you can open your amenity space, we were just all sharing in the office that we can let people, you know, use these lovely amenity spaces that we're proud of. And this is a very unique selling points as well. So different approach for the London, because we didn't have that amenity spaces. We try to engage with them through providing an excellent customer service and look after them and care for them, because we also had few customers that they actually had COVID, so they were positive COVID. So we were even asking them to leave their rubbish outside and not to, you know, walk outside of the building. So we facilitate that service to deliver food outside of their door, deliver parcels. So that's why, you know, I think that they really appreciated the service that they were getting when we were locking down everything else on them.
Silvana, when we had the chat last week, I was very interested in the concept of walkable neighborhoods. Would you like to talk about that, explain what the concept comes from and why should we aspire to a walkable neighborhood?
I mean, the concept of walkable neighborhood has been around for a very, very long time. I mean, essentially, it's good for health, it's good for environment, it's good for finances, it's good for the community. Cities with high walkable scores tend to have higher property values. I mean, there's just, it's good on every front. I mean, for the last 25 years, whenever we're looking at where sites to buy, we used to just apply a 10-minute rule. 10-minute rule being walkable to transport, to groceries, and to some F&B outlets. In Europe, they talk about the 20-minute city, so where you can walk or cycle to. It's used all over, but essentially, as you can see, when sort of COVID locked down and people were just going to their high street, the high streets were being regenerated by but there was a lot of support for your local retailers. So you'd start going to your local fishmonger instead of heading out to the supermarkets. You'd be going to your local cafe, the local fruit and veg. It was much more walkable, and people, I think, generally from all the sort of conversations and things I've read, were saying, by having somewhere close to them, they were supporting more, they were rediscovering areas. And, you know, as we're saying, when you're trying to create a community, when you look at what they're doing, it is about having a mix of living, working, connections that are close to each other. So when you talk about areas where it's lacking, if you look at the city, for examples where it's less affordable and you have less of the key workers and less of the other sort of supporting industries that struggle to be there, then they tend to suffer more in a situation like this because they haven't got that always support of what goes on in local communities. And I think what you're trying to do is create, when you're at Get Living, we built neighborhoods. So we always had a lot of public realm, a lot of buildings, retail, a whole mixture of things, but a lot of built around our single buildings. So when you're saying to be an authentic building in a site, you've got to work with the community that's around you. You can't just be a little island on your own. So I'm sure when you're talking about having sort of your buildings in the city, you'll also be looking at what are the local industries and suppliers and retailers around you, the cafes, the restaurants, whatever it is, the community schemes that are going on that you can be a part of, that just brings that authenticity and makes it feel really real of where your building is. I mean, even at Get Living, where in East Village, where we had sort of 67 acres, you know, and 30 odd retail units, and we would work with all the people around us, with not just within East Village but outside, to run local community groups, local theatre groups, community halls. It's about having that connection with the place where you are, and that's what makes a community happen. And it shows itself through the health of the people living there, through the economics, through you know, green. It's you know, if you're using less pollution, less driving, it's just a win-win.
Exactly, and you're absolutely right, Stefano, because it's not about your building, it's about how you interact with people around you, because you obviously going to an area which is either well established or is going through the regeneration, and what you want is that to give something back to the local businesses. You want to create some opportunity for them as well. It's not about supporting a big supermarket, it's about, you know, supporting local people that they've been seeing your building going up and up and up and thinking, this building will generate me some income, hopefully one day. So I think having all of those elements, you know, in mind as well. And that's what people really like and they will engage with. Like, how many of us goes to a corporate or a big coffee shop or a local shop down the road because we want to support them and we want to make sure they have a healthy business to survive too.
Anya, moving on to the people that actually rent from these beautiful buildings, how did you see a change in the demographic for the tenants, or is there a new trends, developments on the profile of tenants?
I think build to rent has always mistakenly been labeled as a millennial, young professional product, which actually I'm sure all of us on the panel have worked extensively in this market know is not. Because you get everything from babies to pensioners that are inhabiting all of those buildings. And in fact, that's part of the amazing thing about build to rent, is because it's not really a bubble. And I think the most successful communities have got that mix, because like how we were talking just now about all the amenity spaces and what the operators have to bring in, I think the residential market today, where all of our families are very disconnected, right? How many of us live in the same neighborhood as our moms, grandmas, sisters, brothers? Pretty much nobody, right? So our residential community is as close to family as we're going to get, especially in metropolitan cities like London, Manchester, Birmingham, etc., where people are coming for studying or for work. So we're almost changing the way that we view close family and friends, and the people that are surrounding us every day, albeit, you know, your best friend down the hall or the concierge downstairs. These are the people that we interact with on an everyday basis. And then, of course, maybe you find an older resident that's living a few floors up from you, that's a bit like a mom character that, you know, you then exchange tips or cooking things or whatever. So I think the richness of the residence mix is something that benefits everybody. And of course, the design has to be accommodating for all of those uses. One of the first build-to-rent buildings I worked on was a very old property in Hove, which was fantastic because Hove, this was about 5-6 years back, Hove has become a hotspot for lots of young people moving out of London and buying a 5-bedroom house as opposed to a 2-bedroom flat. I think not anymore, but basically back then that was an opportunity. And it provided, you know, the sort of south coast of the UK is very sort of pension friendly. I think there's a lot of the grandmas living down in Bournemouth. So now there's that whole mix of younger people coming in, and it's quite a mixed community, which is fascinating. So we worked on the building there, and it was a very old sort of 60s purpose-built property, but massive windows, lots of light, good proportions, and probably slightly bigger flat sizes than what we're used to in kind of today's build. And people loved living there, you know, and there'll be young people coming in, but there'll be a lot of people who are either retired or maybe they've lost a partner and they prefer living in a community that's got lots of neighbors nearby. I think build to rent really offers that for sort of slightly more senior demographic, is an option of being part of a larger community and not being isolated without needing to be in a senior property. I always have a bit of an issue with the market that's coming, you know, really big now, which is the senior living market, because essentially last thing you want as a person, like I'm thinking, no, when I'm going to be 60 or 70, the last thing I want is to just be surrounded by pensioners, because being surrounded by young people is what keeps you alive. And I think build to rent is a perfect, well, not even an alternative, but product for people of every age. Rather than just kind of 25 to 35-year-olds. I think what our industry can do better, though, is to accommodate families a little bit more, because, of course, a lot of people, when they first sort of move out of their student properties, maybe they live by themselves or as a couple, right? And then as your family unit grows, what do you do? And there are a couple of products in the market where I think they're a bit more family friendly. Build to rent on the whole is very pet friendly, which is fascinating, and I think has been a massive pull for people, because just today I read in a wide article that apparently 1 in every other person in the UK, if you spread all the sort of pets versus people, has a pet, which is fascinating. You know, we're really a pet loving nation. So I'm sure also maybe every 1 in 2 has a child, or, you know, a baby, or like basically a kid of whatever age. So making sure that our buildings are as child and family friendly as they are pet proof, I think will be a good thing to aim for.
Martin, we got a question from Paul Barry of our audience. He's asking, apartments have been getting smaller and smaller, especially with the B2R. Will this need to change if more people are working from home?
I think in reality, probably it won't change. You know, at the end of the day, developers have got to make margin and they're going to work within a certain land value. So I think, you know, we're restricted really in terms of space unless government guidelines change to extend them. But I do think from a design point of view, you know, we need to be looking at that more. We touched on it earlier in terms of adaptability, in terms of the space and how it can work. I do think there's other opportunities within just furniture as well, to actually have furniture that isn't just a chair. It can be a chair that adapts into a place that you could work from. You know, there's things that we're doing in the background as a studio at the minute, working with the furniture manufacturer to develop that idea going forward. And I do think that there's a part in the market to look at where we've got smaller space standards to make spaces work even harder than what they currently are now.
So no more working from your ironing board then.
Hopefully not.
You know?
I agree with Martin. I think it's not always about the size of the space, it's the utilization of it, because sometimes you see a massive apartment, but it's really badly planned. So it's about understanding that, okay, this is what residents want now. And I think you'll see a lot of developers are pretty much aware of, you know, more people are going to be working from home. And if you put the amenity aside, and I think anybody who's designing amenity without an element of co-working or workspace is, you know, missing a trick. Even in our apartments, a desk and a workspace doesn't necessarily have to be in a separate room locked away. It's just about making sure it's built into the fabric of the apartment and planned in to start off with. With a lot of the planning guidelines, I always have a bit of a laugh, you know, when we get an architectural layout which is planned out and is zoned out for, this is the bed, this is the 1.5 wardrobe, and this is your dresser table. I'm like, who uses a dressing table in their bedroom these days? You know, so there's a lot of things where I think maybe the guidelines and the sort of what you have by the book design, not necessarily catching up with how people live. And there's a lot of work that I think goes in from the interior design perspective, is kind of saying, well, this is what you planned for, but this is not actually how people are going to be using the space. Can we rejig it so that, you know, it's actually livable rather than ticks the boxes? It's like what we were talking about. Sometimes there are studios that tick the boxes, and then there are others that are actually thinking about what would be the end user experience. I always like to put us in the latter bracket. So
I agree with Martin. Just going back on the, I think the budgets are there is always a viability, and it's a very tough call making build to rent schemes viable. So I don't think suddenly homes are going to start getting bigger, but what I do think is that the priorities are going to slightly switch in people's minds over where they do spend that money. And again, that comes right at the beginning of the construction process, the design process, where you're working out where everything is going to be going. So I think that's where things have helped, because at the beginning, a few years ago, when we were designing the buildings that have now come through as these build to rent schemes, when you'd be constantly pushing for the differences between what is a build to rent and what is a build for sale. And the difference to me is the fact that the build to rent, you are looking at the long-term management and operation of a building. So your focus is less on having some of the more gimmicky kind of selling points that you might use in a for sale building, but actually just really thinking through the stuff that people don't necessarily see. So how is, you know, plumbing is probably 80% of your costs of leakage in running a building. So how do you just really invest in that part of it rather than making it cheaper and cheaper? You need to just spend that little bit more so that long term it comes out better. Arguments over to have a balcony, not to have a balcony, where those public spaces are being used. these are the places where I see the shift is happening, when people see how people are using their homes now. And it gets easier now that more and more of these buildings are out, and people are saying that build to rent is becoming much more of a known commodity now, that it's helping that argument that was such, you know, in the beginning it was like pushing water uphill to say, no, you've got to switch your focus. It's not just the same thing as a build for sale. It is different, and it will have a long-term impact if we design it the same way.
I'm happy to hear this from you, because that is the same argument that I have over and over, saying we are building to hold on to the asset. We are not building to just sell tomorrow. These assets will be with us at least 15, 20, 25 years, because that's what our investors are looking for. So if we put ill designs in, it will only be more operational costs. So you might be making a small saving right at the beginning, but it's going to cost you long term. So it's just a quick wins versus thinking it through and then gaining some efficiency throughout. And also, I think that will have also a huge implication for your customer satisfaction and the service that they receive. So if you have as you mentioned, leaking pipe day in, day out, your customers thinking, well, this building is not sustainable, or I'm not enjoying it, because you're constantly impacting my right of enjoyment as well, because one day a boiler is coming in, the other day is somebody else is coming in to fix other elements of the apartment. Is well said. I mean, from an operational point of view, and having an operational hat and a customer service hat, I know it will make a huge difference as well. But as Martin mentioned, I have no doubt that balconies will become very popular. So if you have apartments with a balcony, you might be able to let it quicker as well.
So we have another question from another attendee. They are asking, how can you create a successful neighborhood, and can BTR lead the way? Are there any case studies that the panel would recommend that are really successful?
So I guess it's about I think what Martin mentioned is about designing the service for our customers. So we all are looking at different apps and tenant apps and different things. We want to make sure that our local businesses are also considered as part of those providing those services. So what we're doing in terms of, for example, if we're providing a cleaning service, or if we're providing a laundry service, or anything that, even a Uber deliverer. I mean, I sometimes go to the site and I can see people are actually having their breakfast delivered to the building. And I'm just thinking, oh God, like, where are we heading with this one? But I guess that this is what we need to do. Also, in terms of the amenity spaces, I mean, one thing that we've done for a Birmingham scheme, we ran few charity events in other buildings. So it was very popular in terms of, putting a show up, and we didn't charge anyone to enjoy the show, but there was a box of donation, and we gave that donation to the charity. We engage with our customers in terms of a food bank. So we collect about 1,000 kilograms of food that we deliver to a local charity. And these days these things are very important. You probably heard, like, people are talking about the food bank, and people don't have enough money to spend on what we call it luxury. They just want to survive because their income's been impacted, or they had to adopt. Also, when we engage with Birmingham Jazz Festival, so we invited them to come in for our customers and also for our residents. So that's why it's important when we're designing an amenity space, we make sure that we are not jeopardizing the security of the building and this safety of other residents as well. So it's just thinking about, I will always say, think outside of the box when you're designing your space, also to say, can we also engage with these type of people? Can we bring them to our building? Can we collect something on behalf of, our residents and pass it on? So We've done a few things for the Leicester. We work with the homeless charity as well. I mean, we had our away day when we were opening the building. We actually asked our members to sleep and pretend that they are our customers to test everything. So it was like 30 of us, and we bought sleeping bags. So we slept on the floor, and we donated all of these sleeping bags to our residents and the restaurants. So you can have pop-up shops coming in, presenting their products, and people actually love it. And I'm sure that Silvana has done lots of these pop-up shops in Get Living as well. So I hope I've answered the question.
Right, Martin, go back to you with a question from Vicky. Is a bit a challenging question. Shouldn't well-being of tenants be a priority instead of just the developer's profit? I agree that usability of space is more important than size, but people working from home might need a different space to work, so they are not in the same space room all day long, working, resting, sleeping, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in terms of well-being against developers' profit, I can only speak with some of the developers that we work with, and as you mentioned before, obviously what we're doing with Moda Living on a few of their schemes at the moment, they put well-being right at the top of what they do within any development. They have a partnership with Hero Wellbeing. So they have a site on every Moda development, which is you can get dietary checks. They do full health and fitness stuff. Recently over COVID, everyone was out on their balconies doing the Keep Fit class. So, it was great for kind of social well-being, as well as obviously keeping fit as well. In terms of the spaces that we design, we're always looking at, what you would class as well-being, but, there's lots of elements to that. It's not just physical, it's mental as well. And, whether people need some space to get away from things from mental health point of view, or whether they need to interact with people as well. And we try and encourage that through the spaces that we design as well. So I think from the kind of well-being point of view, we're lucky to be working with some developers who put that at the forefront of what they're doing as well, and realize how important that is to, get tenants to engage with their development. You need to build to rent as a sector is different to your normal, here's a developer, they want to build it and then just sell it on. You're retaining your asset. They want that asset to be the best it possibly can be. So one, yes, obviously it's full and they're making a profit, but also to create a great sense of community. So it encourages more and more people to want to live in their type of developments. So there's a continued knock-on effect. If one succeeds, they'll build another one and continue to do that. So I think from the well-being point of view, that's, we're kind of covered. In terms of space planning standards, unfortunately, as I mentioned before, we are restricted in what those are. I think certain developers will look at it differently and actually offer a larger unit size to what is the actual space standard. I know with some of Moda's developments, they're already doing that. We touched on family units before. They've got some 3-bedroom units there that we actually dressed the third room as a nursery or a children's room, and we've been lucky enough to get quite a lot of families through the door as well as other residents who are in their 60s and 70s. So there's a really good broad demographic, which again creates this lovely sense of community. You want to see a broad selection of people. That's important within any community, I think.
Silvana, excuse me, another question for you here. Is the 15 minutes neighborhood the way forward in creating new neighborhoods, and how can the commercial side of mixed-use development adapt post-COVID?
100%. I think the 15-minute rule or 20-minute rule, whatever it is that you want, but the fact that it is walkable is, it's, as I said at the beginning, it's not anything new. I mean, this is how villages were first created, and it just grew and grew and grew, and then sort of that shift to a different way of living. I think it's proved that it is harder to maintain, and you lose a lot of the side benefits of having this 15-minute rule. I read somewhere that Paris is consistently ranked as one of the most walkable cities on earth. And it's just got this abundance of things that you see when you walk around it by foot and not by car. So yes, if you've got that, you know, affordable homes, good quality affordable homes, you've got your supporting businesses around you, you've got where you can work, you've got your sort of your transport links, your food links, your places where you can go out. If you look at places that are coming out like Meridian Water, the huge new scheme on North London, that's all around the same thing again. It's where you can work, where you can live, where you can socialize. It's got support from the arts, from oh gosh, you know, all the different parts that make up a real credible, authentic place with a mixture of your artists and your technology and everything, you know, living, eating, play, parks, absolutely 100%. I think that's where you're going to see the revival of your high street, is by having that combination of things all together. Sorry, what was the second part of your question?
How can the commercial side of mixed-use development adapt post-COVID?
That's it. So it's interesting when you see the way that the different retail complexes are dealing with what's been going on with that. So I think we are seeing a bit of a demise of the big retail complexes, as in a big blackout building that blocks the light, blocks the way through, and seeing much more of open air shopping streets coming in their place and bringing with it an offering of your homes and offices and the retail, but in a much more fluid way. And when you read about the different retail outlets which are changing, are literally just taking this as an opportunity to knock it down rather than try and fudge around the edges. And they're the ones that seem to be coming out the most successful. So again, none of this is rocket science. It's going back to what people want and what people, a much more healthy and sustainable way of living. So yeah.
You.
A good example. Sorry, Sarah. If I may add, the urgent development of King's Cross, for me, has been one of the sort of exemplar developments over the last 5-10 years in what happened in London, because it has everything that Silvana talks about, which is great architecture, the retail spaces that are standalone, how they've utilized the sort of the industrial architecture that was there, which was a coal drops railway station. In fact, I remember the site back from, well, what was it now, 12, 13 years ago, because it was a site for one of our student projects back at the UAL, and it was completely abandoned. Nobody ever went to King's Cross. In fact, whenever people said, oh, I might look at an apartment in King's Cross, everybody looked down and you thought, you're going to get shot, or, you know, you're not going to be able to walk down at night. And how that whole area has been carefully regenerated. It's been spectacular. Of course, it's very difficult to do something like what Arjun have done, because a lot of the areas that we're talking about, Manchester is a great example of that, is that it's been broken up into a lot of plots. So, for example, we have a site right next to Salford Station, and it borders another 5 or 6 build-to-rent sites. And of course, every single one of those sites has got a ground floor amenity or commercial space, and then an amenity of its own, right? And if you think about it, if none of these developers talk to each other, you're going to end up with a building, every single one that has a gym, has a cafe, and I don't know, maybe a hairdresser's or something like that. That's the typical 3, or maybe an art gallery as well. That always seems to be very popular, but not particularly useful, right? So I think if we start to think about building a community, it almost has to be people from different projects coming together as well, in order to create that one fabric of the sort of the central city, or that central community, because essentially each building that you build is part of something, is plugging into the existing infrastructure. And in places like Manchester, where there's so many new buildings going up, and I'm sure some of you have watched that new that BBC series about Manktopia, about developers and how, you know, all of the bad developers, they're all moving in and, you know, cleansing the city, and there's going to be nowhere for people to live, etc. That kind of exercise obviously has to be done really carefully, because you don't want to upset the current residents, but you do want to regenerate the city. So if we can bring them in and create a city that's enjoyable place to live in, and like Silvana says, walkable, where from where you live you can access your doctors, your education, your shopping within a walking distance, which I'm sure a lot of people struggled. I'm based in central London, and even here with the lockdown, it was difficult to walk everywhere and get everything you needed. Only recently did I realize that my nearest post office is 20 minutes walk away, which is ridiculous, you know. So I think if we think of us, not singular developments, but as communities of buildings and projects, then we'll do much better in terms of building something that's coherent and really successful for everybody.
And I think if I just add one more, you know, points to Anya's comment, is that anywhere you go, you also need to consider their culture. So they don't see you as a big player coming to their city and trying to change everything. So I think if you factor in the culture of the city you're going in and have some of those elements introduced to your building, you're probably going to be a bit more successful or accepted by the community.
Definitely. Yeah, it's almost like from the developer, I mean, I think operators and developers have got a lot on their plate in terms of managing the resident expectations, the local area expectations, and everything else. But it's about welcoming the community that you're going to be servicing, and then them welcoming you in return because, you know, of that reciprocation.
Right, I'm a bit aware of time, and also some of our, we lost a few spectators already, so I would use the last question from Anne-Marie, probably starting with you, Anya, but then obviously the rest of the panel, feel free to jump in and join in with your thoughts. So Anne-Marie is asking, are there any areas that the design and operation of B2R schemes could improve on or learn from? Unit design, amenity offerings, landscape, logistics, etc.?
Yes, absolutely. I think whenever we work on build-to-rent building, there's a slightly different school of thought when it comes to amenities and apartments, or there's an appreciation that it's all part of the same build and the vision is for the whole. The design approach is slightly different because the apartments themselves, they're very much, I wouldn't call them units, more sort of individual homes, but there is a repetition to them. And of course, depending on the volume of the scheme, like for example, something like East Village, you're talking about thousands of homes, whereas standard build-to-rent development can start with sort of 200, 250, even some smaller. So making a mistake in a layout that's then replicated 20, 30 times is quite detrimental to the scheme. So there's perhaps quite a lot of work that goes into the design of the layouts of the homes themselves. I think post-COVID, we'll be seeing a bit more of an appreciation for, as the panel said already, outdoor spaces, so balconies and designated workspaces. One of the chats that we had with Silvana previously, I know probably don't have the time to cover it in a lot of detail now, is the people's use of kitchens. I thought that was fascinating because essentially, you know, the way that we're living are changing, and I've always been an advocate of kind of trying to revolutionize the residential space a little bit, because I think the way that we're building is not really caught up with the way that we're living just yet. We're still building very much 20th century model of apartments, of course with some enhancements and tweaks, but be surprised how many layouts there are where I worked on the property in St. Albans, where you had a front room and a back room and then a kitchen. And I'm like, who uses a front room these days, you know? So there's a lot of things like that where I think we still have a way to go in order to create a home that's a bit more flexible, you know, answers different criteria. And I think there is no one size fits all. We need to be offering variety for residents. One of the things that I think probably designers and architects are guilty of is trying to standardize apartments too much, whereas what we really need to be doing is, you know, creating a variety, because we know that people are living differently, the household sizes are different, etc. So being able to offer that flexibility not only is appealing to different varieties of residents, but also allows them to stay in your building as their situation changes, right? So of course, that's a big benefit for both the developer and the resident, I think.
Thank you. Sogol, have you got anything to add?
No, I completely agree with Anya, because if you try to have one type across the board, if you have a potential customer walking through the door and you only have one type, doesn't matter if you have 200 units and they don't like it, they're not going to rent from you. So I think it's being flexible and make the space interesting is my last word.
Okay, thank you very much. Martin?
No, I echo Anya's points on it. I think, flexibility in terms of unit types is really important to get lots of different people into your building, and I think amenity space is the same. I think offering different things, trying to think outside the box and think, what actually do people need and want, not just, as we touched on before, that general tick box of arrangement. Yes, there's a place for those, but I think also looking further afield of what's happening out in society and what people need and want within their community.
And Silvana, last but not least.
I think going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, when we talk about flexible spaces, we're not just talking about an empty box that hasn't been thought through, but we're talking about an empty box that's got the power, the internet connectivity, the cooling, the flooring, the lighting, all the different aspects that actually make it a flexible space. So these are some of the learnings that, you can't just stick a load of tables and chairs in a room and call it a co-working space if there's no power sockets. And you can't run a dance class if you haven't got the right kind of flooring and sound insulation in. So if you're designing these spaces, you need to really think it through so that operationally it works. And I think the only other thing really on build to rent, that you have got this ability to provide choice without going too crazy on how many types of apartment you've got. You are able to, one of the things we do is, if you do take a number of units, some of them you can get properly designed with an interior designer, so somebody can walk in and just say, right, this is perfect for me. And for other people, you can give them a blank canvas and say, right, make yourself at home, paint the walls, put up whatever it is that you want to do, make it yours. And again, as a buy to rent operator, you can let people do that and make the home their own. So you can find offerings of choice and variety, not just through the physicality, but also through the way you operate your service.
Fantastic. Thank you all again for your time this morning. It's been very, very interesting and inspiring. Obviously, thank you to our sponsor, Domus, keep supporting us through this series of panel discussions. We'll be back at the end of October with a new talk, and I hope you have a lovely and very productive month ahead. Thank you. Have a good day. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Bye.